Open the maid's bag. Filth like her probably hides toilet rags, not anything of value. Laughter exploded through the marble hall, where hundreds of military cadets gathered to watch the humiliation. The frayed gray bag was ripped from her hands and hurled to the floor. Stale bread debt notes and a crumpled old photo scattered across the tiles. "Look at that, born from the gutter," one cadet sneered, grinding her heel into the photo until it tore. "You're not even fit to polish a soldier's boots." Then from the chaos, a thick fold of fabric slipped free, catching the light gold stars gleamed in perfect rows, and a general's insignia shone under the chandeliers. The room froze. The man who had laughed the loudest stepped back, face drained of color as he read the name stitched on the collar, Cassian Kestrel, commander of Helion. Lyra stood there, her hands still at her sides, not moving to pick up the mess. Her face didn't change, no tears, no anger, just a steady gaze that seemed to cut through the noise. The cadets, still buzzing from their own cruelty, didn't notice the way her fingers twitched just once, like she was holding something back. The photo torn under that cadet's heel showed a younger Lyra, maybe 10, standing next to a man in a crisp uniform, his arm around her shoulders. The cadets didn't see it. They were too busy laughing, too caught up in the game. But someone in the back, a quiet figure in a captain's jacket, stared at that photo a little too long. The hall was massive, all polished stone and towering banners, the kind of place that made you feel small just standing in it. Lyra didn't belong here, at least that's what they all thought. She was the janitor, the girl with the worn-out sneakers and the plain gray sweater pushing a mop while the cadets strutted around in their pressed uniforms. Alara Dorn, the ringleader, stepped forward of her designer boots clicking on the floor. She was all sharp cheekbones and sharper words, the kind of rich girl who knew her daddy's money could buy her way out of anything. She snatched Lyra's bag off the floor again, holding it up like a trophy. "Let's see what else this nobody's hiding," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. The crowd roared, egging her on. Before Alara could dump the bag again, a junior cadet, barely 19 with nervous eyes and a uniform too big for his frame, stepped forward. He hesitated, glancing at Alara like she might bite, then pointed at Lyra's shoes. "Those sneakers are falling apart," he said, his voice loud but shaky, like he was trying to impress the crowd. "Bet she can't even afford laces." The laughter swelled, and he grew bolder, kicking at the sole of her shoe, knocking off a loose flap of rubber. Lyra didn't look down. She just shifted her weight, her eyes locked on his, and said, "You done?" The kid froze, his bravado gone in a second, and the crowd's laughter turned on him, mocking his sudden silence. Alara dumped the bag out, letting more junk spill across the tiles. A couple of coins, a half-eaten apple, a notebook with a cracked leather cover. She flipped it open, her eyes gleaming as she read aloud, "Jiak mo tro than goi nu cha." The words hung in the air, clumsy and foreign in her mocking tone. "What's this? You think you're gonna be somebody?" The laughter got louder, meaner, like a pack of dogs smelling blood. Another cadet, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a smirk that screamed insecurity, kicked the coins across the floor. "Bet she stole those from the vending machine," he said, crossing his arms like he'd cracked the case. In the corner of the hall, an older janitor, a woman with gray hair pulled tight in a bun, watched the scene unfold. She'd seen Lyra work late nights, scrubbing floors in silence, never complaining. Now her hands tightened around her mop handle, her knuckles white. She took a step forward like she might say something, but stopped when Lyra glanced her way, just a quick look, barely a second. But it held her still. Lyra bent down, slow and deliberate, picking up the coins one by one. Her hands were steady, but there was a moment when her fingers brushed that torn photo, and she paused just a second, barely noticeable. The man in the photo had her eyes sharp and unyielding, even in the faded image. She slipped it into her pocket out of sight. Alara noticed, though, and her smile twisted. "What, you gonna cry over your little picture? Who's that, your imaginary dad?" The crowd howled again, but Lyra just looked at her, calm as stone. "It's just a photo," she said, her voice low, like she was stating a fact. The room didn't quiet, but Alara's smirk faltered just for a heartbeat. A senior cadet, a broad-shouldered guy with a medal pinned to his chest, leaned in, his voice loud enough to carry. "Maybe it's her boyfriend from the slums," he said, winking at the crowd. They laughed, but Lyra's eyes flicked to him, and she tilted her head just slightly. "You sound like you'd know," she said, her voice so soft it barely carried. The guy's face reddened, and he stepped back, muttering something no one could hear. Colonel Darian Vale swept into the hall, then his boots echoing like gunshots. He was a tall man, All angles and cold eyes, the kind of officer who could silence a room just by walking in. His uniform was perfect, not a thread out of place, but there was something about him, maybe the way his jaw tightened when he looked at Lyra, that felt like a predator sizing up prey. He stopped glancing at the mess on the floor. "We hire too many strays to clean these floors," he said, his voice like ice. The cadets laughed, but it was nervous now, like they weren't sure if they were supposed to. Darian's eyes locked on Lyra. "Pick up your trash and get out." A young female cadet, her hair in a tight braid, piped up from the crowd, eager to please Darian. "She probably lives in a cardboard box," she said, her voice high and cruel. She stepped forward, nudging the torn photo with her boot, smearing dirt across the man's face in the image. Lyra's hand twitched again, but she didn't react. Instead, she knelt, picking up the photo and wiping it gently on her sleeve. The cadet kept going louder now. "Why is she even here? She's dragging down the academy's standards." Lyra stood, slipping the photo back into her pocket, and looked at the girl. "Standards?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp enough to make the cadet step back. The room buzzed, but no one laughed this time. Lyra didn't move right away. She met Darian's gaze, her face blank but her eyes steady, like she was reading something in him he didn't want seen. Then she knelt, gathering her things, each movement slow and precise. The cadets watched, waiting for her to break, to beg to do something they could laugh at. But she didn't. She zipped her bag, stood and walked toward the door, her sneakers silent against the marble. As she passed a group of cadets, one of them, a tall guy with a smug grin, reached out, pretending to trip her. She sidestepped without looking, smooth as water, and kept walking. The guy's grin faded and a few cadets snickered at him instead. The room stayed loud, but there was a crack in the noise. Now a flicker of unease. Outside the hall, Lyra paused by a window, her reflection faint in the glass. The academy's flag hung in the distance, its gold threads catching the sunlight. She adjusted her bag, her fingers brushing the zipper, and for a moment her shoulders sagged just enough to notice. A groundskeeper pushing a cart nearby glanced at her, his weathered face softening. He'd seen her before, always alone, always working. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but Lyra turned away, her steps steady again. The groundskeeper watched her go, shaking his head, muttering to himself about kids these days, not knowing who they're messing with. Captain Thane Rourke, standing in the back of the hall, hadn't forgotten. He was younger than Darian, maybe 30, with a face that looked like it had seen too much too soon. His uniform was crisp, but his hands were in his pockets, casual, like he wasn't trying to prove anything. He'd been watching the whole time, his eyes flicking from Lyra's bag to the photo, to that folded fabric with the general's insignia. When Alara tossed Lyra's bag into a trash bin by the door, Thane stepped forward, fishing it out before anyone noticed. His fingers brushed something hard inside a watch. Heavy old, the kind you don't see anymore. He turned it over, and there it was, CK01 etched into the metal. His breath caught. Darian saw it too. He crossed the room in 3 strides, snatching the watch from Thane's hand. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Lyra, halfway to the door, stopped and turned. The hall went quiet, every eye on her. She didn't blink. "It was my father's," she said, her voice even, like she was talking about the weather. Darian's face changed just for a second. Something like fear flashed in his eyes. A lieutenant standing nearby, a man with slicked back hair and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie, leaned toward Darian. "She's bluffing, sir. No way a janitor's got something like that." Lyra's eyes flicked to him, and she tilted her head. "You sure about that?" she asked, her voice so calm it made the lieutenant's tie-adjusting stop cold. Alara, trying to keep the crowd on her side, laughed too loud. "She's lying. Probably stole it from some museum case." But her voice cracked, and the room didn't laugh with her this time. Thane didn't say anything, but he was watching Lyra now, really watching her. There was something about the way she stood, the way she didn't flinch under Darian's glare. He'd seen that kind of calm before, years ago, in a man who'd walked into battle like it was just another Tuesday. The watch in Darian's hand felt heavier than it should have. He slipped it into his pocket, his jaw tight. "We'll look into this," he said, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. Lyra didn't respond. She just turned and walked out, her bag slung over her shoulder, leaving the hall buzzing with whispers. As Lyra stepped into the corridor, a young admin clerk, barely out of her teens, scurried past with a stack of files. She glanced at Lyra, then at the floor, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, almost too quiet to hear, before hurrying away. Lyra didn't stop, but her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. The clerk had been in the hall silent during the mockery, but she'd seen the watch, seen Darienne's reaction. Now her hands shook as she clutched the files, like she'd stumbled onto something bigger than she could handle. Lyra kept walking her steps even, but the air around her felt heavier, like the academy itself was holding its breath. The next day, the academy was different. The air felt tighter, like everyone was waiting for something to break. Alara wasn't done, though. She'd taken the humiliation personally, like Lyra's quiet defiance was a slap in her face. So she planned something bigger. In the main hall where the whole academy gathered for announcements, she staged a public bag check. "Let's make sure our janitor isn't stealing anything else," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. The cadets cheered, feeding off her confidence. Lyra stood in the center, her bag at her feet, as Alara and a few others started tearing through it. They dumped everything out again, making a show of it. A torn scarf, an old passport pages yellowed and creased. A piece of stale bread was wrapped in a napkin. The crowd laughed loud and cruel as Alara held up the scarf like it was evidence of a crime. "This is what she carries around. Pathetic." Another cadet, a guy with a fake tan and a Rolex, kicked the bread across the floor. "She's probably eating out of the trash," he said, grinning. The laughter grew, but Lyra didn't move. She stood there, hands clasped in front of her, watching them, like she was studying a play she'd seen before. A female officer, her lips painted red and her posture stiff, stepped forward holding a pen like a weapon. "This is why we don't let just anyone in here," she said, her voice sharp. "She's a walking embarrassment." Lyra's eyes met hers, and she tilted her head slightly. "Then, why's your hand shaking?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. The officer's pen dropped, clattering on the floor. Then Alara pulled out the folded fabric again, the general's uniform, the one with Cassian Kestrel's name. She held it up, smirking, but before she could say anything, Darienne stepped in. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but sharp. He took the uniform in, his fingers brushing the gold stars, like they burned. "This doesn't belong to you," he told Lyra, his eyes narrowing. "A nobody like you pretending to be a Kestrel. Disgraceful." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some whispering. A cadet in the back, a girl with a nervous laugh, called out, "She probably sewed that name on herself." The crowd laughed again, but Lyra didn't blink. She stepped closer to Darienne, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never said I was pretending," she said. The words hung in the air, and the girl in the back stopped laughing. Thane was there again, off to the side, his hands still in his pockets. He noticed something the others didn't. A tiny pattern in the stitching of the uniform, a series of laser-etched threads that formed a code. He'd seen it before, years ago, when he had trained under Cassian Kestrel. Only someone from that family would know how to read it. He stepped closer, trying to get a better look, but Darienne was already folding the uniform, tucking it under his arm. "We'll handle this," Darienne said, his voice clipped. He turned to Lyra. "You're done here." A maintenance worker nearby, his hands stained with grease, watched the exchange, his jaw tight. He'd overheard Darienne talking to an aide about cleaning up loose ends the night before, and now he looked at Lyra like he wanted to warn her. But she was already moving her steps, calm, her bag in hand. Lyra didn't leave. She took a step forward, her voice calm but clear. "I know what you're afraid of in that uniform, Colonel." The words landed like a stone in still water. Darienne froze just for a second, but it was enough. The cadets didn't catch it, but Thane did. Alara, desperate to keep control, laughed too loud again. "What, you think you're some kind of hero? You're just a maid playing dress-up." But before she could say more, a sharp beep cut through the air. A screen on the wall flickered to life, and a list scrolled across it. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Darienne's name was at the top, tied to millions in missing funds. The room went dead silent. Cadets stared at the screen, then at Darienne, whose face had gone pale. In that moment, a young tech officer, his glasses slipping down his nose, scrambled to the control panel, trying to shut down the screen. His fingers fumbled, sweat beading on his forehead as the data kept scrolling. He glanced at Lyra, his eyes wide, like he'd just realized he was in over his head. Lyra didn't look at the screen. She just picked up her bag, slinging it over her shoulder, and started walking toward the door. The tech officer muttered something about a glitch, but no one was listening. Alara's voice broke the silence, shrill and panicked. "She's lying. She planted that date." But the crowd was shifting, some cadets stepping away from her, their faces uncertain. Lyra's steps didn't falter, but her hand brushed the pocket where the torn photo sat, and for a split second her fingers lingered there. Outside, a group of younger cadets, too new to join the mockery, stood clustered by the fountain. One of them, a boy with freckles and a nervous habit of chewing his nails, watched Lyra pass. He'd seen her cleaning the library late at night, always with that same quiet focus. Now he nudged his friend, whispering, "She doesn't look like a liar." His friend shrugged, but his eyes followed Lyra too, like he was starting to question the stories they'd been told. Lyra didn't notice them. She stopped by a bench, setting her bag down for a moment, and pulled out a small cloth, wiping her hands clean. The gesture was small, ordinary, but it felt like she was washing away the whole scene behind her. Darien wasn't done yet. He snapped out of his shock, his voice booming across the hall. "Arrest her," he shouted, pointing at Lyra. "She's a spy infiltrating this academy, forging evidence." Two guards moved toward her, their hands on their cuffs. Lyra didn't run. She turned, letting them grab her arms of her face as calm as ever. The crowd was chaos now, some shouting, some whispering, some just staring. Lara, seeing her chance, pulled out her phone, live streaming the whole thing. "Look at this traitor," she said, her voice shaking with fake outrage. "She's pretending to be a kestrel, but she's just a criminal." A journalist in the corner, her notebook open, scribbled furiously, her pen, pausing only when Lyra's eyes met hers for a brief moment, like a warning. The guards cuffed Lyra's hands behind her back, but she didn't resist. She looked at Thane just once, her eyes steady, like she was telling him something without words. Thane didn't move, but his hand tightened around the pen in his pocket. The cadets were buzzing, some calling her a traitor, others just watching unsure. Darien stepped forward, his voice cold. "The Kestrel name will be erased from this academy's history," he said, holding up the uniform like it was proof of her guilt. A senior instructor, a woman with a tight bun and a habit of tapping her foot, nodded in agreement. "She's a disgrace," she said loud enough for the hall to hear. Lyra's lips parted like she might speak, but instead she just straightened her shoulders, the cuffs clinking softly. Then the radio crackled. A low, steady voice filled the hall, cutting through the noise like a blade. "All units stand down. This is General Cassian Kestrel." The doors at the end of the hall swung open, and there he was, tall, weathered, his uniform torn, but his presence undeniable. The room froze. Cadets stepped back, some dropping their phones, others just staring. Darien's face went white, his hands shaking as he clutched the uniform. Alara's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Lyra didn't move, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. A maintenance worker nearby, his broom forgotten in his hands, let out a low whistle, his eyes wide. "That's him," he muttered to no one, like he'd seen a ghost. Cassian walked forward, his boots heavy on the marble. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the chaos. His eyes went straight to Lyra. "Release her," he said, his voice low, but carrying the weight of command. The guards hesitated, then unhooked the cuffs. Lyra rubbed her wrists, her face still calm, but she didn't look away from her father. A young cadet near the front, his cap slightly crooked, whispered to his friend, "That's really him." The general. His friend didn't answer, too stunned to speak. Cassian turned to Darien, holding out a tablet with a single document open. "You're under arrest, Colonel, for embezzlement, treason, and the attempted cover-up of my death." The screen behind them flickered again, showing the same data now broadcasting live to the nation. Alara collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she sobbed, reaching for Lyra's arm. "I didn't know who you were." Lyra stepped back out of reach, her face unreadable. Darien, still clutching the uniform, shouted, "She tricked us. She's been lying this whole time." But the guards were already moving in, cuffing his hands behind his back. A reporter in the back, her camera rolling, zoomed in on Alara's tear-streaked face, then panned to Lyra, who stood still, her bag at her feet. The cadets who'd laughed before were quiet now, their heads down, some shuffling toward the exits. The live stream was still running, Alara's phone forgotten on the floor, capturing every second. Cassian didn't look at Darien. He turned to Lyra, his voice softer now. "Honor doesn't come from a uniform," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "It comes from doing what's right, even when the world's against you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small metal pin, a new insignia gleaming under the lights. The crowd was silent, watching as he pinned it to Lyra's shoulder. "From now on, you're Lieutenant Colonel Lyra Kestrel," he said. The room didn't cheer, didn't clap. It just held its breath. An older officer, his medals clinking as he shifted, looked away, his face tight with something like shame. He'd been one of the loudest critics earlier, but now he couldn't meet Lyra's eyes. Lyra stood taller, the pin catching the light. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She just nodded once to her father. Alara was still on the floor, her sobs the only sound in the hall. Darien was led away, his shouts fading as the doors closed behind him. The cadets started to scatter, some whispering, some just staring at Lyra like they were seeing her for the first time. Thane stepped forward, his hands out of his pockets now. He didn't say anything, just gave her a small nod, like he'd known all along. A janitor sweeping nearby paused, leaning on his broom, and muttered to himself, "Knew she wasn't just some kid." His voice was low, but it carried, and a few cadets nearby glanced at him, then at Lyra, their faces uncertain. The news hit fast. By that night, Alara's livestream had gone viral, but not the way she'd wanted. Clips of her mocking Lyra, tearing through her bag, were all over the internet, with comments calling her out by name. Her family's company lost a major defense contract the next day, and her social media accounts went dark. A gossip blogger known for digging up dirt posted a thread about Alara's history of bullying with screenshots from old classmates who'd been too scared to speak up before. The thread exploded, and by morning Alara's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Darian's trial was set for the following month, but the evidence was airtight. His career was over. The cadets who joined in the humiliation faced quieter consequences. Some were suspended, others just avoided Lyra's eyes in the halls. Lyra didn't stay long. She walked out of the hall that day, her bag slung over her shoulder, the new insignia glinting on her uniform. She didn't look back, didn't stop to talk to the reporters waiting outside. A car was waiting for her, a black SUV with tinted windows. Cassian got in first, holding the door open. As Lyra slid into the back seat, she glanced at the academy one last time. The banners still hung, the marble still gleamed, but it wasn't her fight anymore. A street vendor outside selling coffee to the crowd watched her go, his hands pausing mid-pour. "That's the Kestrel girl," he said to a customer who nodded, eyes wide. The car pulled away and the crowd outside parted, watching her go. Weeks later, the rumors started. Tabloids ran headlines claiming Lyra only got her rank because of her father. A few old officers bitter about the scandal whispered threats saying they'd make sure she'd never last. Social media was a mess. Half the posts called her a hero, half called her a fraud. Lyra didn't respond. She was called to testify before Congress, a room full of suits and skeptical faces. One senator, a gray-haired man with a voice like gravel, leaned forward. "You really think you're tough enough to carry your father's legacy?" he asked, his tone dripping with doubt. The room waited, cameras rolling. A young aide standing in the back clutched her clipboard, her eyes flicking to Lyra. She'd read the reports, seen the data from the chip, and now she held her breath waiting for Lyra's answer. Lyra stood at the podium, her uniform crisp, the insignia shining. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. She plugged it into the podium system, and a video flickered onto the screen behind her. Cassian's face appeared older, tired, but with that same unyielding gaze. "If you're watching this," he said, his voice steady, "it means justice is back where it belongs." He paused, looking straight into the camera. "Everything I've done, every honor I've earned, belongs to Lyra Kestrel now." A murmur ran through the room, and the aide's clipboard slipped slightly, her hands trembling. The senator who'd spoken shifted in his seat, his face tight. The room was silent. The senator who'd spoken looked away, his pen tapping nervously on the table. Lyra waited until the video ended, then leaned into the microphone. "I'm not here to carry my father's legacy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to finish what he started." She stepped back, her hands at her sides, as the room erupted in applause. A journalist in the front row, her glasses fogging up, scribbled notes so fast her pen tore the paper. Outside, the flag of Hellion waved in the wind, catching the light. Lyra walked out of that hearing, her head high, her steps steady. She didn't need to say more. The truth was out there now, in the open, undeniable. You've been there, haven't you? Judged, pushed aside, told you don't belong. You held your ground, even when it hurt. You weren't wrong for that. You were never alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.